There's a very good chance that by the end of this video, you're going to know how to prevent one of the most annoying and expensive rust problems in your house with a part that costs less than a coffee. And not just that, you're also going to know exactly what to inspect, what tiny component is designed to quietly fail before your water heater does, and why replacing that one cheap piece of metal can save you from the kind of plumbing bill that arrives with a sigh, a leak, and a plumber telling you the whole unit is finished. Because most people think rust is just one of those things you notice when it is already too late, but the truth is much stranger than that. In a lot of cases, rust can be redirected, controlled, and pushed onto something cheaper. And once you understand how that works, you start seeing one of the oldest and smartest protection systems in the world, hiding in plain sight inside your own home. There's a piece of metal inside millions of houses whose entire job is to die in place of something far more expensive, and almost nobody knows its name. That sounds dramatic, but it is literally true. Inside your water heater right now is, or at least once was, a sacrificial anode rod, usually made of magnesium or zinc-based material, and its job is to corrode so the steel tank does not. The same principle is used on ship hulls, oil pipelines, underground tanks, and major industrial infrastructure all over the world. Yet most homeowners are never told that one of the most important anti-rust systems in their house is a part that costs almost nothing and can prevent a replacement that costs thousands. And the science behind it is almost annoyingly simple once you hear it. Rust is an electrochemical process, which means if two different metals are electrically connected in the presence of water, the more reactive one will give itself up first. Zinc and magnesium are more willing to lose electrons than steel is, so they become the sacrificial metal. They corrode first, keeping the steel in a protected cathodic state. That is why this is called cathodic protection. And it is one of the oldest, most battle-tested corrosion control methods ever used. The whole trick is not eliminating corrosion altogether, it is redirecting it onto something cheaper. This is not some modern trick discovered by a guy in a garage 3 years ago. In 1824, Sir Humphrey Davy was commissioned by the British Royal Navy to solve corrosion on copper-sheathed warships, and he proved that attaching a more reactive metal could stop the copper from corroding by making the attached metal corrode instead. That principle never went away. It became standard on ships, pipelines, tanks, and water systems, which is why it is so strange that ordinary homeowners are almost never taught the one version of it sitting in their own utility room. And this is where the money part gets ugly. Most people experience a water heater rusting out as though it were simply the natural end of the appliance's life, but in many cases the real turning point happened years earlier, when the sacrificial anode had already been consumed and nobody replaced it. The industry already knows this part matters. It builds the product around this part. It just is not the part most people hear about until the tank is already halfway to failure. And that is a very profitable gap in knowledge, because a homeowner who knows how to inspect and replace a sacrificial anode every few years is a homeowner who may delay a major replacement for a very long time. Now, here's the practical part, because this is the bit that actually makes your life better. If you have a conventional tank water heater in your house, the most useful DIY project here is not attaching random zinc gadgets to every pipe in your basement. It is inspecting the anode rod that is already designed to protect the system you have. First, check how old your water heater is. If it is around 3 to 5 years old and the anode rod has never been inspected, that is the maintenance item that matters most. Second, look up your exact model and confirm where the anode rod is installed, because most are accessible from the top under a hex head. Third, inspect it and replace it if it is heavily consumed, thinned down, or covered in buildup. That one cheap rod is the thing standing between normal operation and the steel tank itself becoming the next victim. In fact, once you know this, there's a very simple 20-minute corrosion audit you can do in your own house. And this is the sort of thing that quietly makes life better, because it turns a vague fear of something might rust someday into a short practical check you can actually do. First, find the age of your water heater and work out whether the anode rod has ever been inspected. Because if the answer is no and the heater is already a few years old, that is the first thing worth paying attention to. Second, look around any visible plumbing transitions and see whether different metals appear to be joined directly together. Because copper meeting galvanized steel without the right fitting is exactly the sort of small detail that causes irritating corrosion problems later on. Third, check out door hose bibs, exposed steel brackets, utility room fasteners, and any metal parts living in permanently damp corners, because once you start seeing corrosion as a chemical process instead of a cosmetic problem, stop ignoring the early warning signs. The whole point is not to become a plumber, it is simply to stop being the last person to know that a cheap sacrificial part, or one bad metal transition, was all that stood between you and a much more expensive repair. And once you understand that, a lot of other things start making sense. Galvanized steel is steel protected by zinc. Boat hulls carry sacrificial zinc blocks. Underground tanks use sacrificial anodes. The whole corrosion world runs on the same principle. If damage is inevitable, choose where it happens. That is what makes this so fascinating. Rust is not always something you simply endure. Sometimes it is something you can negotiate with. There's also one small bonus lesson here that can save people a headache. If you ever see copper connected directly to galvanized steel or another dissimilar metal in older plumbing, that can create galvanic corrosion at the connection point, especially in the presence of water. So apart from checking the anode rod, one very smart thing to look for during a home corrosion audit is whether visible plumbing transitions seem to have proper fittings between dissimilar metals, rather than bare metal-to-metal contact. It is a tiny detail, but it is exactly the kind of detail that prevents irritating, expensive problems later. So the next time somebody tells you rust is just one of those things, remember that is only half true. Rust may be inevitable, but where it happens is often negotiable. And in millions of homes, that negotiation is being handled by a cheap, sacrificial metal most people do not even know exists until it is gone. That's it for me today. I hope you learned a lot, and I'll see you in the next one.